Good morning. Good morning, and welcome to Tuesdays on the Daily Huddle. My name is Tara Heaton, and I am your host for the first Tuesday of the month. But every Tuesday, our theme is relationships and communication. And that is my field, that is my passion, and that's what we're going to dig into today. And we have a question for you all today. And that question is this, and I don't want to be a spoiler, but the question is, who is blocking your joy? So one of the first things I think we need to do is define what joy means to us, because the more I research joy, the more I realize like psychologists don't agree on the definition, biologists don't agree on the definition. And at the end of the day, that doesn't really matter. What matters is how you define joy. So I'm going to share an experience with you that helped me to really think about what joy means to me. And some of you may know this, and many of you may not, because it is one of my greatest regrets in life. But for about 22 years, I was an avid smoker of Marlboro Lights. And anytime I had a quiet moment or downtime, I was really ashamed of this awful habit. So I hid it from people, but I was always sneaking away to have a Marlboro Light. And as much as it brought me shame, the opposite of joy, it also gave me these little hits of pleasure. And so it took me a long time to stop smoking. But not only was I smoking cigarettes, I was drinking a lot of caffeine. And get this, y'all, I was doing a lot of cardio. And today I have coined a phrase. And what I call those little hits of pleasure that we are all seeking is, I call that pleasure stacking. And because of what is accessible to us today, we all have the propensity to be pleasure stackers. As a matter of fact, and my friend Debbie, who's here, would probably relate to this. Not too long ago, I was in Florida with my brother because my dad was not well, and we sat in the hospital with him for many hours. And when we walked out of the hospital room to go get some dinner, my brother said, "Where are we going?" Let's get some pleasure stacking going. Like we needed some pleasure. We needed some hits of pleasure because of all that anguish. So I want to talk a little bit about pleasure and how I relate it to joy. And then we're going to talk about you and what could be blocking your joy today. And I think there could be two things that are blocking our joy. So when we look at pleasure, I want you to ask yourself, like how you're getting little hits of pleasure throughout the day. And what I call this is micro pleasure stacking. So it could be caffeine, it could be sugar, it could be cardio, it could be shopping, it could be Netflix, it could be social media. The list goes on and on. But it used to be that when we got finished with something hard or something challenging, we couldn't automatically reach for a snack or reach for an iPhone or reach for a glass of wine or a cup of coffee. But today, those things are so easily accessible that we've not allowed ourselves just to be in the grief, to be in the pain, to be in the challenge, or to be in the joy, because we are getting these instant hits of pleasure that we're addicted to. I'm still a pleasure stacker, but I'm very careful about it because I am a great advocate of pleasure unless it is getting in the way of our joy. And so I want to peel that back. So that's your micro pleasure stacking, right? Little hits of pleasure from maybe your cell phone, caffeine, sugar, etc. But there's also macro pleasure stacking. Macro pleasure stacking is when we are obsessed with a big lofty goal. So we want to get to that promotion at work, or we're wanting to keep running till we hit a better time on a marathon, something that really is farther out. So it's a big goal for us, but we become obsessed with it. So back in the days when I was living off of what I used to call caffeine, nicotine, and Listerine, I was also macro pleasure stacking. I was after curing epilepsy for my daughter, and I was completely obsessed with it. So much so that I would not allow myself to come up for air and experience joy. So I had the little tiny hits of pleasure, the cigarettes and the caffeine, and I was cardio, which is just a horrible combination. But I was also obsessed with a long-term goal. And those two things, micro and macro pleasure stacking, are getting in the way of how I define joy. Again, lofty goals are wonderful. Little cupcake or a cup of coffee or a glass of wine, all those things I think are wonderful pleasures on earth. But when we are using them to interfere with what truly matters to us in life, then they become challenging. And here's what I've learned, and this is a big theme in my book that will be out in just a few months, is not only are we using pleasure stacking to get in the way of joy, but also when we hit times of grief and struggle and strife, it's almost as if we tell ourselves we have not earned the right to experience joy. Like, how could I ever throw my head back and laugh when someone that I love is suffering? So we don't even give ourselves permission for joy. So I want us to think just for a minute about how you and how I define joy, because it could be very different. But I do want to give a little biology lesson because there is some science in here that will really help to back up what I'm saying. So for me, joy, if I had to condense it down into three things, for me, joy is a creative outlet. It is having a purpose, like purpose-driven activities during the day. And the biggest thing is rich relationships. So that's me. Could be different for you. But of those three, rich relationships is scientifically proven to give us sustainable joy. And here is why. If we go out for a run and we get great endorphins, that lasts a few hours. If we have a cup of coffee or we have some sugar, that gives us that hit of dopamine and that sense of pleasure just for maybe 20 minutes to an hour. But when we invest in our relationships, quality, rich, trusting, bonded relationships, that fires up something in us called oxytocin, and that has the ability to last for weeks. So you see, for me, joy is an energy, and it all has to do with not what is only internal, but what we put back out into the world. There are several studies, but I'll just share two that really back up what I'm saying. Some of you may be familiar with the study that Harvard University did that started in 1938, and it is still running today, and it was a study on happiness. And there have been over 2,000 people involved in this study. And the director of the study, who's put out a book on this, says that there is one single key to joy, and that is quality relationships. So that doesn't mean that we need hundreds of friends. Quite the opposite, quite honestly. It means the people that in our lives, are we taking the time to connect, to listen, to truly enjoy them? That is sustainable joy. There is another study, which I bet a lot of you all have studied, these are the blue zones. So there's, I can't remember, I think it's 7 blue zones of the world. And this is where people live the longest. And there are a couple of things that they all have in common. And one of those things that they all have in common is that they're in community. So think about that. There is a biology in joy, the way that I define it. And that, to me, for joy is that sustainable feeling of peace and energy. And we can get that feeling from connecting with each other. That is one of the great treasures that we're afforded in this life. So I ask you how you define joy, and have you ever stopped to think about the difference between joy and pleasure? And before I listen and hear a little bit about what you think joy is and how joy shows up in your life versus pleasure, I want to really peel back the two ways that I think that you are blocking your joy and I might be blocking my joy. So the first, just to review, is that micro pleasure stacking. Rather than sitting and allowing ourselves to feel that we might be feeling lonely, we might be feeling grief, we might be feeling disappointed, rather than allowing ourselves to feel that, we go for the micro pleasure stacking. That's what I was doing all those years ago with cigarettes and caffeine. I could not face what was happening, not only to my daughter, but to my family. And so anytime there was a quiet moment, rather than sitting in that grief, I was distracting myself with little hits of pleasure. So think about that. Nothing wrong with pleasure, but are we using it to distract ourselves from facing that grief? And the other thing that I was doing all those years ago is I almost shamed myself for having moments of joy. And you know what? That not only hurt myself, it hurt my entire family by thinking that I just had to stay mission driven until I could eliminate the grief. And here's what I've learned about pain and grief: it is undefeated. You cannot win that fight. We have to let it in. That's the only way to set it free. And when I think about it in those terms, it turns into energy. And no matter what I'm facing in life, I can take that energy and put it back out into the world with intention in the form of love. And to me, that's what joy is all about. So I'd like to hear from you all and how you see joy, and if you might be blocking your joy with either micro or macro pleasure stacking, or if you're simply just not allowing yourself joy.
Tara,
Yes,
sorry, forgive me, I'm not on camera today,
that's
but
all right. Glad to hear
um,
your voice.
yeah, thank you so much for that, and Happy New Year. It was just interesting to me because I hadn't really thought about it quite that way. That we deny ourselves joy sometimes because of the fact that we think we're supposed to grieve, and we are supposed to. We are supposed to. When that emotion is appropriate, that's the emotion we're supposed to have, right? And to not embrace it as the emotion that's supposed to be had is to try to deny the emotion that we're supposed to get to have. And as you said, it's going to win.
Yep.
They're triumphant. Those emotions are going to be triumphant,
Mm-hmm.
and I hadn't really thought about it in those terms before. So I just want to thank you for just bringing that to my attention and giving me something to look at because so much of what we live about life is just about our awareness.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you so much for that.
Yes, I love your growth-minded perspective. So thank you for really kind of sitting on that and giving it a true taste and wondering how it shows up in your life. I had an experience with my son years ago, and it was a moment of grief around his sister Caroline, who many of you know um, has been has suffered from seizures that damage her brain for many years. And he said to me this, and I think this really goes with what we're talking about, Stan, is he said to me, he said, when is this going to stop hurting? And do you know what I told him? Never.
Wow.
Never.
Wow.
And he was
Mhm.
shocked. He was like, "What do you mean? Like, is this never going to end?" And I said, "No. As long as you love Caroline, it will always hurt what she's lost, but not every minute of every day." And once I accepted that part of my life will always be grieving for what she lost, it doesn't consume me anymore. I owe it to her to bring joy into the world. And to me, that's transformational. So thank you for holding on to that message. Any other thoughts coming up for you all? Good morning, Sorrel.
Good morning, Tara. Um, I just want to share what I'm getting from what you're creating. I block my joy when I confuse pleasure for joy.
Okay.
So if I hear you correctly, I pleasure stack, whether I'm micro stacking or macro stacking. And then in my head, if I say that's joy, I miss the point.
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm hearing you correctly and create that with me, is that pleasure is not joy, and vice versa, even though one may beget the other.
Mm-hmm.
If I have created joy in my life, there may be some pleasure in there, but pleasure for sure by itself is not joy. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. And I love pleasure. So I'm all about the pleasure
So
stack.
do I.
It's not to say that we shouldn't have pleasures. I think sometimes, I think a lot of folks actually try to deny themselves even pleasure.
Mhm.
But I mean, I think a perfect example was I took a few days off with my husband, and we were laying in the hotel bed, and we got the pack of M&Ms from the mini bar. Ridiculous price for the little tiny pack of M&Ms. absolutely pleasure. But the fact that we were laying there on the bed sharing them and kind of giggling about eating a $10 bag of M&Ms, that was joy, that connection.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think
Yeah.
sometimes folks hear this message, though, Cyril, and they say, okay, so what do I do with this? Investing in relationships takes work.
Hmm.
Yeah. One of our new hosts for one of the Tuesdays on the Daily Huddle is a woman named Lee Mitchell, and she's a really wise therapist. And she sent me a message recently, and she said, oftentimes we are quiet in relationships to try to keep the peace, and it feels like love. And she said to me, she said, keeping the peace is not the point of relationships. Love is. And sometimes that takes hard conversations. And that reminds me to work on all the relationships that I treasure, not to go out and seek new ones, but to work on the ones that I treasure.
Yeah, it works for me to kind of like wrap things into a nice little bow.
Mhm.
And so the conclusion I'm drawing is that maybe for human beings, joy is living fully, like embracing everything that comes, and that could be it. Embrace everything that comes. If it's pain, just like you were saying, if it's grief,
Mhm.
embrace. And then the embracing of life just the way it is, my life just the way it is joyful, even though it may not feel good at the time. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. That's how I look at life. I always say I want to live life with all my might.
Yeah.
And I had someone recommend to me many, many, many years ago. He said, "You know what, Tara, you can't get too disappointed and you can't get too down. You just need to kind of, keep things in check." And I am not made that way. That's just not how I live life. So when I hurt, I cry. And when I hurt, it hurts deeply. But when I feel joy and connection and love, I used to try to buffer that and not, because I think a lot of people thought, well, that's a lot. You
Yeah.
know what? Tough as shit. As my friend Kathleen would say, I'm not for everybody. But I've got to let that freak flag fly, and I've got to let my joy shine, because I talked about purpose, and I truly do want to take the suffering that my family and I have endured and put it back out into the world in the form of joy and love.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you
Yeah.
for living like a bat out of hell.
Most days, most days. Oh,
Thank you, Tara.
absolutely, absolutely. So I do have a few tips about taking this message forward. Gio has something, and then I'll share the few tips.
Oh, okay. I almost want to hear the tips now. Wait. So, but I'll tell you what I was discovering with in your conversation with Sorel and everyone else. What was triggering for me, what was opening up for me, was this interesting dance between understanding how my brain works. There's an aspect of understanding it that there's nothing joyful or romantic about it. There's something to understand about the way my brain works. And it's critical to be able to dance with life. And in this context of joy and pleasure, and it gives me this kind of power over myself to know that maybe I'm not broken. Maybe something is not wrong with me. Maybe I just need to talk to Kurt a little bit more. Not only because my relationship with him is distancing, but also because my brain needs it. I'm kind of seeing that. And in my being vulnerable and open with Kurt, my experience of life grows. And there's nothing neurological about it as an experience. My experience of life is growing. And yet I kind of understand that the right chemicals are being triggered by being present to the person I love.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of what I'm discovering in this conversation. The dance, what is opening up, my head hurts. I need a drink. But yeah,
I'm glad that you're stopping to give that some thought. I bet you have more examples in life than you realize of the power of oxytocin. I experienced it on Christmas night, like so palpable, and I'll tell you what I mean. My brother was in town, and he had a gig to play his guitar and sing in this little restaurant on the night of Christmas. And I was so excited. I invited these close friends to share his magic and all be there together. But by the time it was time to go, it was 8:30 at night. I was so tired, so tired. My husband backed out. Some of the other husbands backed out. But about, I don't know, there was probably 8 or 10 of us in there. Two of my adult children were there. And I went from being so tired to so alive in a matter of minutes, sharing that music and all those people in the room that I loved and connecting and sharing something that gave me such joy and delight. That's energy. That's oxytocin. So yeah, it's powerful. Of course, someone's knocking at my door because I'm in a hotel room. So I'll be there in a minute. Anywho, the power of Zoom, right? I do want to wrap us up with a couple tips, though. If you're thinking, "Wow, I want that energy from relationships, but I don't really know how to go about it," I'm going to have you guess because the person at the door is still knocking. So hang on. I'm on a meeting. Hi. Sorry, y'all. Power of Zoom. She would not stop knocking. Okay, so back to our tips. Two tips that I like to use when I feel like I really want to either revive a relationship or deepen it. And one of those is this: rather than asking someone about the facts of their life, so like, what did you do this weekend? How'd your work day go? What are you doing? When's your next vacation? Instead of asking about only facts, ask about the way that those facts affect the person. So if someone shares with you that they went on a vacation, tell me the favorite part of it. Why did you love that particular area of the world? What did this do for your relationship with your significant other if you were traveling together? Ask the person about the effects on their life that the facts are having. That builds connection. So this is the flip side of this. What I'm saying is ask great questions, really listen, take an interest in the effects of these facts. But there's a danger in this, and this is the second tip. Taking great interest in people and asking great questions does not create a relationship. We have to be willing to share. Share our truth, share our insecurities, share our wins, share our celebrations. That makes a relationship. I was raised by somebody who was a queen question asker, and my friends would come over and she would take the deep interest in their lives. And I took that from her, and I think it's a great gift that I took out into the world. But I had to learn the hard way, and this was in my sales career, that just listening and getting to know somebody else does not make a relationship. So those are the two tips for helping you to maybe minimize a little bit of your pleasure stacking and be really more intentional with when you want to put pleasure into your life and elevate your joy. And that means enrich your relationships. And we can do that by asking great questions about the effects of facts on the person's life. And the other is make sure that you too are sharing your truth with the people that you treasure. So I hope this will help to elevate joy in your life. We're going to continue on this conversation, but next Tuesday, we have Christy Bailey, who is the author of The Upside Divorce, and she's also a brilliant real estate agent, and she's going to be the host on the second Tuesday of the month. On the third Tuesday is Lee Mitchell, the brilliant therapist that I told you all about, who specializes in trauma and addiction. She will blow your mind. And on the fourth Tuesday of every month, we're going to have Andrea Villa Velez. And she is a brilliant life coach that has a wealth of knowledge about how to not only enrich your communication and relationships, but get your life on track. So I am so excited about Tuesdays on the Daily Huddle. Thank you all so much for being here. I'm going to close us out with our tenets. And the first of those is love. Sometimes all I have to remind myself is, Tara, today is not about you. It is about putting love out into the world. It's about giving to others, and it completely changed my perspective. The second tenet is to be generous. You have something to give. It might not be in your wallet. It might not be something you possess, but it's in your heart. So give what you have. That will fill you with joy. There is no doubt about it. And remember this. Take time to laugh. Throw your head back. Let those endorphins fly. It is an energy that is sustainable and it is contagious and will absolutely elevate joy in your life. Take care of your body. Remember to get your rest. Rest is important. Put mostly plants and whole foods in your body, a lot of water, and make sure that you get up off that booty and move the body to the best of your ability that the good Lord gave you. Thank you for being here on Tuesdays on the Daily Huddle, and we'll see you tomorrow with Chase Steele, who talks all things wellness and vitality. Have a great Tuesday.